The winter that year had been longer, harsher, and far more unforgiving than anyone could remember. Deep within the forest, where silence hung heavy and food was almost impossible to find, a mother black bear struggled to keep her family alive. Once a symbol of strength and power, she had now become a fragile shadow of herself, her massive frame withering as each day passed without nourishment. But it was not her own hunger that weighed on her. It was the sight of her two cubs, their tiny bodies trembling with weakness, their eyes losing the brightness of life. Every morning, she pushed herself forward, leading them to familiar foraging spots where berries once grew in abundance. But this spring offered nothing. The bushes were bare, the streams frozen, the forest floor stripped of roots and grubs. Each failed attempt meant another day her cubs went hungry, their cries for milk turning softer, more desperate. One cub had grown too weak to walk, forcing her to carry him gently in her jaws, while the stronger one stumbled behind, his legs barely holding him up. Her instincts told her to stay away from the edge of the forest, to avoid the strange scent of humans that lingered in the wind. But another instinct, even stronger, began to rise within her, the unyielding force of a mother's love. She had survived many hardships before, but never had she felt this helpless, this close to losing the lives she had sworn to protect. Days turned into weeks, and the forest gave no mercy. The mother bear's paws bled from digging into frozen soil, searching for anything edible. She had even risked venturing into dangerous predator territories, but each effort ended in failure. Her cubs grew thinner, their playful spirit replaced by silence. She knew that time was running out. Then, one evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, a new scent drifted toward her nose, unfamiliar yet promising. It carried with it the faint aroma of food, fruits, vegetables, even the remains of human meals. Fear clashed with hope in her chest. Approaching humans had always meant danger, but watching her cubs struggle to breathe, she realized there was only one choice left. With trembling strength, she lifted her weakest cub once more, nudging the other to follow. Step by step, she moved toward the distant glow of human lights, her heart pounding with uncertainty. It was a path no bear would ever take willingly, but desperation had broken every boundary of instinct. That night, under the rising moon, the starving mother bear made a decision that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who would soon witness her arrival. The first light of dawn stretched across the quiet valley as the mother bear and her cubs finally emerged from the dense cover of the forest. Their dark silhouettes cut through the pale morning mist, moving slowly toward the edge of a small human settlement. The mother's once proud stride had become a weary shuffle, her head hanging low, her ribs pressing against her fur with each shallow breath. She paused often, turning back to check on her cubs, the stronger one trembling with every step, the weaker one limp in her mouth, his breaths so faint she feared each might be his last. The world around them was unlike anything the cubs had ever seen. The air smelled of smoke, cooked meals, and fruit trees planted in neat rows. Strange structures rose in the distance, their shapes sharp and unnatural compared to the forest's flowing lines. Every sound, a passing car, a barking dog, even the rustling of leaves stirred by the breeze, filled the mother with both fear and determination. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back, to protect her cubs from what she had been taught to avoid since she was young. But stronger than fear was the desperation in her heart. She could no longer let hunger steal her children away. The settlement lay quiet, still wrapped in the calm of early morning. The mother moved cautiously, sticking close to trees and shrubs where she could, her eyes scanning for danger. The stronger cub staggered beside her, his little legs wobbling but determined to follow. From time to time, she placed her weaker cub gently on the ground, nudging him to move, but his body had grown too frail. Each time she tried, his legs collapsed beneath him, forcing her to lift him once again and press on. At last, a particular scent caught her attention, stronger, sweeter, more promising than anything else she had found. It came from a yard of a home nestled at the edge of the settlement, where tall oak trees spread their branches like guardians. The air was thick with the aroma of birdseed, fruits, and freshly turned soil from a garden patch. Something deep within her instincts told her this was the place. That home belonged to Jennifer Miller, though the bear could not have known it. To her, it was simply a beacon of survival. Step by step, she crossed into the yard, lowering her cubs beneath the oak tree where the grass grew thick and soft. The stronger cub collapsed beside his sibling, both too weak to move further. Their bodies, once meant to be full of life and energy, looked skeletal under the rising sun. The mother bear stood over them, her body trembling from exhaustion, her eyes scanning the silent house. For the first time, she felt her fear give way to something different: hope. She had brought her cubs to the very edge of danger, placing their fragile lives in the hands of fate. Would the humans chase her away? Would they harm her? She didn't know. But as she looked down at her babies, both barely clinging to life, she realized the risk no longer mattered. Inside, Jennifer was just beginning her morning, unaware that her peaceful backyard had become the stage for a story that would change everything. With her coffee brewing and sunlight streaming through her kitchen window, she glanced outside, expecting the usual birds at her feeders. Instead, her heart nearly stopped at the sight that greeted her: a gaunt mother bear and two dying cubs lying in her yard, their suffering laid bare beneath the rising sun. Jennifer froze, her coffee mug slipping from her hands and shattering against the tiled floor. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Beneath her old oak tree, a black bear stood trembling, her ribs jutting sharply through patchy fur. At her paws lay two cubs, one curled up, his tiny body shivering uncontrollably, the other frighteningly still, his chest barely rising with shallow breaths. Jennifer's first instinct was fear. Bears were wild, unpredictable, and dangerous. But that thought dissolved as quickly as it appeared. What she saw in the mother's eyes was not aggression. It wasn't even the cautious wariness she had expected. Instead, the bear's gaze locked with hers through the window, and Jennifer felt something she had never thought possible: a plea. The animal's eyes, sunken and exhausted, carried a desperate message that transcended every barrier between species. "Help us." Jennifer's throat tightened, tears flooding her vision. She knew enough about wildlife to understand the warnings. Never feed wild animals. Never let them become dependent on humans. But this was different. This wasn't a case of interference. It was a case of survival. If she did nothing, the cubs wouldn't live through the day. Her hands shaking, Jennifer grabbed her phone. She didn't call animal control or the police. She knew they might choose to relocate or even euthanize the starving family. Instead, she dialed the number of Sarah, a local wildlife rehabilitator she had once volunteered with at the shelter. Jennifer's voice cracked as Sarah answered. "Sarah, you need to come right away," Jennifer sobbed. "A mother bear and two cubs are in my yard. They're starving. One of the cubs can barely breathe. Please hurry." Sarah's calm but urgent reply steadied her only slightly. "Stay inside, Jennifer. Don't approach them. I'll be there in minutes, and I'll call Dr. Chen on my way." Dr. Michael Chun was the region's leading wildlife veterinarian, known for his work with injured animals. If anyone could save the cubs, it was him. While waiting, Jennifer couldn't stand idle. She ran to her kitchen, grabbing what little she thought might help: honey, oats, and apples. Her mind screamed warnings against feeding them, but her heart refused to let them suffer a second longer. She placed the food on a tray and stepped slowly outside, keeping her distance. The bear raised her head immediately. Jennifer froze, heart pounding, but the mother did not charge. She simply watched, her body swaying with weakness, her eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. Jennifer placed the tray several yards away and backed into the house, tears streaming. The mother sniffed the air, then nudged her stronger cub toward the food. Trembling on unsteady legs, he stumbled forward and collapsed at the tray. With effort, he began to eat. The weaker cub remained motionless until the mother carefully lifted him and set him beside the food, her massive head nudging him gently as though begging him to try. Jennifer's sobs shook her body as she watched. The mother bear herself hadn't touched a single bite. Even in her own starvation, her priority was her cubs. Minutes later, Sarah's truck skidded to a stop outside, followed closely by Dr. Chen's vehicle. The commotion drew neighbors from their homes, curiosity quickly turning to shock as they, too, laid eyes on the desperate scene. Within half an hour, the once quiet street was lined with people, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Sarah immediately began setting up emergency feeding stations, arranging fruits, protein-rich foods, and a special formula for malnourished wildlife that Dr. Chen had brought. The veterinarian's face grew grave as he studied the cubs through binoculars from a safe distance. "They're critical," he murmured. "If we don't get food into them carefully, they might not survive the shock. But we have to try." With practiced precision, Dr. Chen and Sarah placed small portions at safe intervals, then retreated. Every eye in the gathering crowd fixed on the bear family. Silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the faint whimpers of the cubs. What happened next stunned everyone. The mother bear sniffed the food closest to her, but did not eat. Instead, she once again nudged her stronger cub forward, guiding him toward survival. The little bear wobbled, then began to nibble. Gasps and muffled sobs rippled through the crowd. Even hardened neighbors, construction workers, retirees, parents, wiped their eyes as the reality of the scene unfolded. Then the mother turned back to her weakest cub, who had not yet moved. With heartbreaking tenderness, she picked him up once more, placing him at the food. The cub stirred faintly, opening his dull eyes as if responding to his mother's unyielding will. Slowly, shakily, he began to lick at the mixture. It was a fragile, flickering sign of hope, but in that moment, it felt like a miracle. Jennifer pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely. Around her, neighbors filmed the scene, their voices choked with emotion. Within hours, the first videos spread across social media, carrying the heartbreaking yet hopeful story far beyond their small town. As Dr. Chun carefully observed, his own eyes welled with tears. In 2 decades of treating wildlife, he had never witnessed such a display of maternal devotion. "This," he whispered to Sarah, "isn't just about survival. This is about trust. She's putting her cubs in our care. That's extraordinary." The mother bear finally approached the food herself, but even then, she ate slowly, cautiously, her eyes flicking constantly between her cubs and the humans watching from afar. It wasn't fear, not anymore, it was understanding. Somehow, she seemed to know that the people before her were not enemies, but her family's last chance. As the sun rose higher, the scene shifted from one of despair to one of fragile hope. The cubs ate, the mother gained strength, and a community once divided by fences and unfamiliarity found itself united in compassion. In that yard, beneath the oak tree, something extraordinary was taking place, something that would touch hearts far beyond their small town and spark a chain of events no one could have imagined. The hours that followed were unlike anything Jennifer or her neighbors had ever experienced. What had begun as a morning of quiet routine had transformed into a community-wide mission of compassion. News of the starving mother bear and her cubs spread quickly, first through the neighborhood's group chat, then across social media, and finally to local news outlets. By afternoon, Jennifer's quiet street was lined with cars, their drivers arriving not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming desire to help. Sarah and Dr. Chun coordinated carefully, insisting on safety while ensuring the family received the nourishment they so desperately needed. Volunteers were organized into shifts, watching from safe distances while food was placed at strategic points. Everything had to be measured, calculated, and gradual. Malnourished animals could not be fed too quickly, or their fragile systems might collapse. Each portion of emergency formula and carefully chosen fruits was set out with meticulous care. Then everyone retreated to allow the bear's space. The mother bear's behavior astonished even the most seasoned wildlife experts. Instead of showing aggression or fear, she remained calm, deliberate, and astonishingly cooperative. She allowed her cubs to eat first, guiding them gently with nudges of her muzzle, her own hunger always set aside. Only after the cubs had eaten did she begin to take her own share, her massive frame trembling with weakness, yet holding herself with quiet dignity. The effect on the onlookers was profound. Neighbors who had never exchanged more than polite greetings were now standing shoulder to shoulder, tears in their eyes, united by the sight of maternal love, so fierce it transcended species. Phones recorded every moment, the cubs taking their first proper bites, the mother's watchful gaze, the way her massive body shielded them even as she accepted human help. Videos uploaded to social media exploded in popularity. Within hours, hashtags dedicated to the bear family began trending. Wildlife organizations took notice. The State Conservation Center dispatched additional supplies, including specialized feeding equipment and medical support. The Regional Bear Research Team sent experts to monitor the situation and document what they called an unprecedented case of human-wildlife cooperation. Local businesses donated food and resources. Schools encouraged children to write letters and draw pictures for the bear family, and strangers across the country began sending donations. But it wasn't just the material support that moved the community. It was the emotional transformation unfolding before their eyes. Within days, the cubs began to show signs of improvement. Their once dull, listless eyes began to brighten. Their frail bodies, once skeletal, slowly filled out with strength. The weaker cub, who had seemed only hours from death, began to raise his head more often, his legs supporting him for short, shaky walks. His first tentative steps drew gasps of joy and applause from the gathered neighbors, many of whom found themselves crying openly at the miracle they were witnessing. Jennifer, who had first spotted the family beneath her oak tree, began keeping a daily photo journal. Each day, she captured the subtle but undeniable signs of recovery. A little more energy in the cubs' movements, a bit more shine in their fur, the mother bear standing taller as her strength returned. Those photos, shared online, became a symbol of resilience. People from around the world followed the updates as if they were invested in their own family member's survival. Thomas Anderson, a local wildlife photographer, began documenting the bear's journey. His images, raw and breathtaking, spread across news outlets and social media platforms. One photograph in particular went viral. The mother bear lying in the grass, her cubs curled against her, their bellies finally full, her eyes reflecting exhaustion, but also something deeper, hope. That single image was shared millions of times, touching hearts from one continent to another. The media coverage grew, but instead of sensationalizing the story, reporters treated it with reverence. One evening broadcast featured live footage of the cubs playing for the first time, a wobbly tumble that turned into a clumsy wrestling match beneath the oak tree. The sound of their squeals and playful growls, carried across television screens and smartphones, left viewers in tears. For many, it was impossible to believe these were the same cubs who, only days earlier, had lain on the edge of death. The story's reach extended far beyond the borders of the small town. Messages poured in from across the globe. A teacher in Japan used the bear family's journey as a lesson in compassion for her students. An elderly man in Canada wrote that watching their recovery gave him hope during his own battle with illness. A young girl in Australia mailed a hand-drawn picture of the bears, along with a note that read, "This story made me want to take care of animals when I grow up." Celebrities and influencers shared the videos, adding their voices to the chorus of admiration and support. Donations to wildlife rehabilitation centers skyrocketed. Conservation groups reported record numbers of new volunteers. For the first time in years, the conversation about wildlife and human coexistence was filled not with fear and conflict, but with compassion and possibility. For Jennifer's community, the impact was even more personal. Neighbors who had once lived parallel lives now found themselves connected. They organized schedules, shared resources, and checked in on one another. Barriers dissolved in the face of their shared mission. Elderly residents who had rarely ventured out of their homes now sat safely in parked cars for hours, watching the bears' progress with quiet prayers on their lips. Tough construction workers wiped away tears as the cubs grew stronger. Parents brought their children to witness the sight, teaching them lessons about kindness and responsibility that no classroom could match. The transformation of the bear family mirrored the transformation of the people around them. Each improvement in the cub's health felt like a victory for everyone involved. When the weaker cub finally stood steadily on his own, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Strangers hugged, laughter mixed with sobs, and for a moment, the divisions of the world seemed to dissolve. As weeks passed, the change became undeniable. The cubs grew energetic, tumbling through the grass with the reckless joy of young life. Their fur regained its glossy sheen, their bodies filled out with healthy weight, and their eyes sparkled with curiosity. The mother bear, too, underwent a stunning transformation. Her once gaunt frame filled with strength, her coat shining under the sun, her movements confident and powerful once more. Dr. Chun confirmed what everyone could see. The family was thriving. But even more remarkable than their physical recovery was the bond that had formed between the bears and the humans who had helped them. The mother remained cautious, always keeping her distance, yet she displayed an unmistakable awareness of the people around her. She seemed to understand the routine, guiding her cubs to the feeding stations at the right times, watching carefully but without fear. To the experts, her behavior was unprecedented. To the community, it was nothing short of miraculous. And still, the story spread. Videos of the cubs' playful antics reached millions. Articles about the extraordinary rescue appeared in newspapers worldwide. Wildlife experts hailed it as proof that compassion could redefine human-wildlife relationships. Environmental organizations used it to highlight the urgent challenges of habitat loss and climate change, reminding people that these desperate encounters were not accidents, but consequences of a changing world. Through it all, the image of the mother bear standing guard over her cubs, her eyes filled with a mixture of strength, trust, and gratitude, became a symbol of hope. For Jennifer and her neighbors, it was a daily reminder of what they had accomplished together. For people around the world, it was a story that renewed faith in humanity, proof that even in a fractured world, kindness still had the power to heal, to unite, and to change everything. Summer had just begun to paint the valley in shades of green when the signs became clear. The bear family was ready to return to the wild. The cubs, once fragile shadows clinging to life, now tumbled across Jennifer's yard with boundless energy. Their glossy black coats shimmered in the sun, their playful growls echoing through the neighborhood that had once wept at the sound of their pitiful cries. The mother, her strength fully restored, no longer carried the weary slump of exhaustion. She moved with the power and grace she had once known, her eyes alert, her body whole. Dr. Chin confirmed what everyone could see. "They're ready," he said softly, his words tinged with both pride and sadness. The weeks of careful feeding, observation, and community effort had given the bears a second chance. Now it was time to let them reclaim the life that had nearly been stolen from them. On a golden morning, the community gathered one last time. Families, neighbors, and volunteers lined the edges of Jennifer's yard, their faces a mixture of joy and sorrow. Children clutched drawings they had made of the bears. Elderly residents brought small gifts to leave beneath the oak tree, tokens of a journey none would ever forget. Jennifer herself stood near her window, the same place where she had first locked eyes with the desperate mother, her heart aching at the thought of saying goodbye. The mother bear seemed to sense the change. For days, she had grown restless, her gaze lingering longer on the forest beyond the yard. Now, with her cubs bounding at her side, she led them slowly to the tree line. Just before disappearing into the shadows of the woods, she paused. Turning her massive head, she looked back at the gathered crowd. The moment was electric, silent yet filled with meaning. Her eyes met Jennifer's once more, and for the briefest heartbeat, it felt as though she was saying thank you. Then, with a final push of her muzzle, she nudged her cubs forward, and together they vanished into the forest that was always their true home. Tears fell freely, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of triumph, of hope, of gratitude for having witnessed something so extraordinary. The bears had come to them starving and broken, and now they returned strong, wild, and free. In Jennifer's yard, beneath the oak tree where it had all begun, the community placed a small plaque. Here, a mother's desperate plea was answered, and countless hearts were forever changed. The story of the bear family lived on. In classrooms where children learned about compassion, in conservation groups inspired to protect wildlife, and in the hearts of millions who had followed their journey. It was a reminder that kindness knows no boundaries, that sometimes the most unlikely moments can unite people in love, and that even in the darkest of times, hope can find its way forward.